Hi, it's Amanda here from Crochet with lesson 2 of my left-handed crochet tutorial. In today's lesson I'm going to show you how to begin a project. There's 2 methods of starting a project and I will show you both. So to begin with, I will show you the chain method as that was lesson 1, and hopefully you've managed to have a practice and feel comfortable holding your hook and your yarn and doing that chain stitch now. So to begin with, just as before in lesson 1, we start in exactly the same way with that wrap around our fingers, coming underneath, crossing over the top to make a cross. We're going to use our hook to go underneath the first yarn, picking up the second yarn with our hook, pulling through, slight twist, releasing from our fingers and just pull slightly to make that loose knot. Remember not to make that knot too tight, otherwise you're not going to be able to pull your working yarn through your loop when you're making your chains. So remembering to tuck that tail end out of the way so we don't use that as our working yarn by mistake. I like to just hold it against my crochet hook. We should begin our chain. I'm going to give you a little tip in a moment of how to make life so much easier for yourself when you're learning crochet. In the beginning, it can be quite difficult to see your stitches. With practice, you'll know exactly which stitch you're going to go into. In the beginning, it can be tricky because not only are you learning to crochet and your tension might be slightly different, which makes your stitches different sizes. You can count back, and sometimes people end up counting this as a stitch and it's not. This is just your joining loop. So to begin, we wrap the yarn around your finger or however you found it comfortable to get that tension. We bring the hook towards us, hook underneath the yarn, holding that joining knot with finger and thumb just to secure and give us a little bit of tension there so it doesn't fall off our hook. Moving your hook, not your wool, we pull through that joining loop, okay, and that creates your first slip stitch. And it's at this point that I'm going to give you the handy tip. Before carrying on, we're going to pop in a stitch marker, okay? If you haven't got a stitch marker, you can just cut off a coloured piece of yarn, different coloured yarn to what you're working with so it stands out, and we're going to place the stitch marker into our first chain. So I should just pop that in, okay? And you'll see why that is going to be so useful for you moving forward. So for this example, we shall say our pattern says 6 chain and join to the first chain to make our circle, okay, our beginning loop. So we've done our chain 1 and we've marked it, so we know exactly which stitch is chain 1 now. So we'll continue and do another 5 chain to make our 6. So 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6. So we've got 6 chain. I'm using chunky wool, so it's actually quite easy to count backwards and find your first chain. However, if you're using double knit on a 4mm crochet hook, for example, as your first starting projects, this is going to be a lot smaller to see, and this is where your stitch marker now comes in very handy. The pattern will ask you to join to the first stitch, and we know exactly which one that is because we've marked it. So we take our stitch marker out and you go back and you join to your first stitch. So for a slip stitch to join, hook through the stitch, hook the working yarn, pull through the first loop, okay, and through the second loop. and that gives you a circle. And your pattern will ask you to then, for example, chain 1 and continue working, for example, 6 double crochet into the circle. So that's method 1. However, I prefer method 2, which is called a magic ring. The reason I prefer the magic ring is because once you have done your work into this center circle, the hole you're left with cannot be adjusted. Okay, with the magic ring, however, you will have a loop, a working yarn that you can tug, and it will close the circle, so you're not left with such a big hole in your work. So let's move on and I'll show you how I do the magic circle. So just as before, I use the same method, and this is why I taught you this method of joining onto your hook as well, because it makes life easier now with this magic circle how I do it. So wrap it over the 2 fingers as before, underneath, bring the yarn across to make a cross, yarn under the first yarn, hook the top yarn, pulling through and off. Okay, now what we do is we hold that there. Can you see? You have a circle and you have a loop with a strand that works its way through the loop with a tail here. Okay, so just pinch in the very top because it's not secure yet. You just have a loop that's going to move. Okay, you need to pinch that with your finger and thumb at the top. Okay, I'm just going to pull that tension down on the hook slightly, and you're just going to do a chain 1, which you know how to do now. Chain 1. Okay, you now have a circle and a chain 1 to secure it, so when you let go you're not going to lose your circle. The pattern will then ask you to work into the magic circle, and so for example I'm just going to do 6 double crochet to show you the difference with the hole. So let's just do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, I will move on to the stitches over the next lessons, so please don't worry about those. This is just an example to show you how this magic ring works and why I like using it. So on the previous example, if we had done this into our circle, the hole you're left with, you cannot adjust that hole. However, with the magic ring method, we have our stitches and we have our tail end, not the working end. The working yarn's here. This is our tail end. Okay, and if we just pull that tail end slightly, okay, we can close our circle, and then you would just do a slip stitch in some patterns to join. Okay, and that would form a circle with a lovely centre. Some patterns you will work in a continual round, and so you would then carry on to do your next stitch in here rather than a slip stitch to join, as I just showed you. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed today's tutorial on how to begin a project, and I'll see you on lesson 3.